Before I can install the upper section of the forward superstructure onto the lower section, I need to complete the construction of these small hut-like structures. I'm not going to be using the parts that came with the plastic kit. I have replacements for these parts in the photo-etch detail upgrade kit. The replacement photo-etch part consists of two components, the walls and a floor piece that allows it to be centered over the plastic protrusion in the deck, and a roof. These parts need to be folded, glued together, and then have the gaps filled. Once the part has been prepared, I can then install it onto the deck. As you can see, if I were to try and do that after I installed this upper section, I think it would be a bit difficult to get the part underneath it. So, best to install this before putting this upper portion on. The only other thing that I need to do before gluing these two parts together is I need to paint them. The deck will be painted in a different color to the bulkheads, so it makes sense to paint them at this stage while they are unobstructed. Since all of these parts will need to be painted, I'll start by assembling these huts. After cutting the photo etch off their fret, I fold them. The score lines are very deep in this photo etch, and on the roof it actually goes all the way through. So folding it is very easy. You don't need a photo etch folding tool to do this. It's very delicate work with tweezers. Once I have the sides folded into the correct position, and then apply extra thin superglue to the edges using a wire. After applying the superglue to all of the edges, there can be a little bit of excess that's seeped through and is on the outside of the part. This needs to be removed, otherwise when you paint it, that will show. Since these parts have a smooth finish, that excess can be sanded off. If this part had fine detail on the exterior, I'd have to clean off that excess glue using acetone. Once I'm happy with the bulkheads for this structure, I install them onto the roof. Once again, I use extra thin superglue to glue it down. Now that all the photo etch is glued together, I can look for gaps that need to be filled. On the bulkheads, there aren't any gaps, so I'm happy with how that's turned out. But on the roof, because they had these very deep score lines, they're not really score lines, they're cuts all the way through the photo etch. Because of that, and the corners on that tapered edge, there are large gaps on the roof that need to be filled. Otherwise, they will be very visible once this part is painted. To fill those gaps, I use a combination of putty and extra thick superglue that I apply with a toothpick. Once the putty and glue has dried, I then sand it off to create a smooth finish. That is potentially still not good enough, so to be sure that all the gaps are properly filled and that the part is in a condition that's ready to be painted, I first spray them in Mr. Surfacer 500. There was a little bit more back and forth, but in the end I was happy with the finish, and so I can move on to the painting phase. At this point I'm going to paint all the parts that I've constructed in the last few videos. As with all the bulkheads and most of the superstructure on this ship, I will be painting it in Tamiya XF53. This is the color that I'm using to represent the hull color for HMS Hood. I paint the bulkheads first because I think it is easier to mask off the vertical section than it is to mask off the floor. You can use tape to follow the curve of the bulkhead far more easily than it is to cut out sections and have it contoured to meet that curved edge on the floor. It just saves time with cutting and positioning tape. Anyways, since I am going to paint the deck second, I have no concern about taping off any areas of these parts. Everything is going to be painted in Tamiya XF53 at this stage. I suppose it also should be noted at this stage, now that it is becoming a thing, that it's my intention to also paint the ceilings in XF53. So if you do look up from underneath, you're going to just see XF53. And I think that's the correct way to do it. The top of the deck will be painted in a different color because obviously that's waterproofing and the like. But from underneath, when looking up, I expect it to be just the same color as the bulkheads. I always enjoy painting the parts. You get a good feel of how the ship is going to look. It helps make them come alive. It's especially satisfying when you're painting parts that have a lot of modifications on them. As you've been working with them, you've seen this patchwork of different color plastics and glues and filler, and you know all the work that's gone into it to change it into the form that it is currently in. And then when you go over it with the paint and you just wipe out all of those visible marks on the part and have all those joints that you've tried to hide disappear, it's really satisfying to see what now looks like a truly single structure almost as if it was somehow molded in the shape that it's in. But to truly complete the effect, we need to put on some other colors. So next I paint the deck, but before I can do that, I need to tape it off. Here I'm using 6mm masking tape, and I apply it to the balustrades so that when I spray this area of the ship, they don't get painted on the inside in the color of the deck. You can see here what I mean by it's easier to tape off the bulkhead than it is to tape off the floor. I can do this with literally one piece of tape. Whereas if I were to try and do this, well, it's not so bad over here. On this section of deck, you can see the point that I'm trying to make a lot more clearly. How many pieces of tape and cuts would I need to be able to accommodate all these curves if I was painting the balustrades and bulkheads second rather than the deck second? Once all the areas that I want to keep in XF53 are sufficiently protected with tape, I then move on to spraying the deck. According to the HMS Hood Association, both of these decks are understood to have been covered with cortesine, therefore they need to be painted in XF79, this reddish brown color. This is deck linoleum from Tamir. Another area to paint are these platforms for the AA guns. Here I'm not sure which color I should use. There isn't much information or really any information that I could find on this one. So I'm going to replicate what I saw in the shelter deck in those gun pits. So I'm going to paint them in what I'm using as the color of Semtex, that is XF82. As before, I need to ensure that the area that I want to retain in the color of XF53 and of cortesine is sufficiently protected. So I tape off the structure and make sure that I'll be able to spray these platforms in XF82 without overspray covering any paint that I wish to retain. I'm also not sure if this is even the correct color to use for these platforms. It could just as easily be cortesine, and if that is the case, then I hope somebody will tell me in the comments, and then I will respray them in XF79. That is all the painting that needs to be done for this upper and lower section of the forward superstructure. But there's another thing that I need to do before I end this video. Several videos ago, I painted the large bollards on the forecastle deck in XF53, the color of the superstructure, when they should be painted in XF1, black. So this needs to be corrected. Fortunately, this isn't a difficult correction. Almost all of these bollards are out in the open and easy to access, and they have a base that is rectangular. So it's very easy to mask that off and then respray them. There were only two bollards that were a bit problematic, and those are the two that sit in the enclosed section of the forecastle deck. But even then I was able to get masking tape in with tweezers and mask it off, and then I just brush painted them. That then brings me to the end of this video. Now that I've corrected the color of the bollards, I have completed the painting work for this video. And that means that in the next video I can move on to joining the upper and lower sections of the forward superstructure together. If you would like to support this channel or see how this ship looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.